Blue Beach is not found on a list of beaches commonly visited in Nova Scotia, but maybe it should be. The beach itself isn't actually blue. That color is found in the cliffs, sometimes when the light hits it just the right way. The beach is actually brown, made up of the mud and rocks so common in the Minas Basin. But Blue Beach provides an opportunity for a really interesting hike that takes me way, way back in time. And it's where I'm on my walkabout today. The trailhead for Blue Beach is certainly easy enough to find. It's marked by the Blue Beach Fossil Museum, which proclaims this unassuming location to be the birthplace of vertebrate paleontology in Canada. The Quonset hut, which houses the current museum, displays fossils found along the shore. And they have big plans with hopes to build a larger and more permanent building, formalized trails, and a restaurant on site, attracting 25,000 visitors a year and becoming a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is the Avon River, and the tide is on the way out now. And pretty soon you'll start to see the mudflats. The water is starting to get that very classic brown color where the mudflats will be above the water surface. If you drive by Windsor at low tide, you can see those. And this is the time to be walking this beach. The tide can comes in fast, and you don't want to be caught here. And if you are looking for fossils, there is no better time than when there's no water covering the beach. The cliff edge leaning into the beach here is part of what is known as the Horton Bluff Formation. In fact, this beach was just once known as Horton Bluff. The rock formation was first described in detail by geologists Jackson and Alger in 1828, who were also well known for studying Cape Split and Blomidon, and who created the first geologic map of Nova Scotia. They were followed in 1836 by Abraham Gesner, the physician born in Cornwallis who is famous for the invention of kerosene, but whose passion was not medicine, but geology and natural history, and on which he published a number of books. Over the next 150 years, there was a lot of debate among geologists about where each part of the formation started and ended. Ultimately, geologists, though not completely agreeing, have concluded that 2 layers of the Horton Formation become exposed here at Blue Beach. Now, you may think this is something which only matters from a theoretical point of view, but it matters in terms of understanding the age of the rock here, and in turn, the fossils. It's said that nature does the digging here, and that's because the Bay of Fundy has the highest tides in the world, and with every tidal cycle, new fossils are uncovered here on this beach. Now, what makes Blue Beach particularly important is trackways of the very first animals to leave the water and get on land. The very first vertebrates with a backbone were discovered here in 1841 by Sir W.E. Logan. Now, he is a gentleman for whom the highest peak in the Canadian Rockies is named. This find was a decade before the better-known fossil discoveries at Joggins, and is why some see Blue Beach as the birthplace of vertebrate paleontology in Canada. Discovered in 1841, but the fossils, of course, are so much older than that, 350 million years old. Blue Beach is recognized as the most important location for lower Carboniferous fossils, which is a period of time running from about 359 million years ago to 327 million years ago. Carboniferous comes from the Latin words carbon and bearing, or carrying, so literally means carbon or coal-bearing rocks. And of course, this was the period of geologic time when many of the coal beds around the world were formed, including right here in what is now Nova Scotia. So this beach is known for the oldest terrestrial vertebrate fossils found anywhere in the world. Now, there are other fossils here, of course, too. There's fish, plants, all kinds of different things. And that makes this place really, really interesting. Paleontologists have a word for that. It's Lagerstätte, which is a German word meaning storage place. And that describes the bounty that can be found here. Now, you would then think that fossils would be underfoot everywhere, and perhaps in some respects they are, but it does still take some looking because they can be found between layers of rock. And that's why paleontologists will spend a lot of time here with picks like this, trying to split the layers of rock and find fossils. Nothing yet, but you can see how they do this. Anywhere in the world fossils are found, they give an indication of what life was like in that particular area. The Earth itself looked very different, both in terms of the land and sea environment, but also how the continents were spread out. But it seems that hundreds of millions of years ago, Blue Beach would have still been a shoreline area, perhaps of a large marshy bay with a more distant connection to a sea of some kind. The fossil and geologic evidence here suggests that the water was likely brackish, not quite salty, not quite fresh, a little like the Florida Everglades. And another connection to the Everglades, the climate in this area at the time was likely tropical, with early forests and swamps. You know, there's new species being found here periodically as well. In fact, in 2015, one was found that was named after Chris Mansky, who is the owner of the Fossil Museum near where I started this hike. And there's more. 350 million years. I've mentioned that number a few times, the age of the fossils. And that's important because there is a period of time called the Romer's Gap, which has been an evolutionary mystery for some time. And here on this beach, there are fossils which may explain that mystery. And those fossils are upending the understanding of paleontologists of some of the extinctions at the end of the Devonian period. That's after the break. I'm on Blue Beach in Avonport in search of fossils, or at least the history of fossils here. Now, before the break, you would have seen me standing right here to tell you what was coming up next. And only seconds later, that entire section of cliff collapsed and landed right here. And I only point this out because when you're on hikes like this, you do have to be careful and have to be watching where you're going. Certainly I had no idea that that was going to start to collapse. And then just towards the end of my period of time on camera, then I started to notice little stones falling. I walked out and this entire lump landed here. Anyways, back to our story in the Romer's Gap. There is a gap in the world fossil record. Prior to 375 million years ago, there are fossils of tetrapods throughout the world. And there are fossils of tetrapods after about 340 million years ago. But there has generally been little evidence of tetrapods during the period between those years, the Romer's Gap, a period of time named in 1995 for Scottish paleontologist Alfred Romer, who was the first to identify this gap before his death in 1973. Tetrapod is a fancy word for any four-limbed creature, or a creature that was four-legged at one time but evolved to lose their limbs. So snakes are tetrapods, despite not having legs anymore, because they once had them. Tetrapods are believed to have evolved from lobe-finned fishes around 390 million years ago. In the context of the fossil record and Romer's Gap, paleontologists are particularly interested in amphibian-like creatures, creatures that may have been the first to transition from the water to land. Just on the beach, I found this rock, which is a fossil, which is either worms or could also be sort of the marsh that would have once been here many millions of years ago. But according to a couple of passers-by, they said that these are actually fossils of worm casings. Let's step back, way back, 420 million years ago to the Devonian period. In the seas, the early relatives of squid were starting to appear. Fish still pretty much had no jaws, although sharks and some of their relatives were starting to diversify. On land, plant life was exploding. Trees were appearing, along with the first wingless insects. This is also when, around 375 million years ago, vertebrates must have started to move from the sea to land. Since after Romer's Gap, fossils are found on land. Now, animals do this first by just resting on the shore and eventually developing legs which are suitable for use on the land. They develop the muscle mass necessary to support being out of the water and climb onto land. These early land dwellers are still connected closely to the water. They are amphibians which feed on fish and spawn in the aquatic and marine environments. Amphibians, but not like today's frogs or salamanders. These were somewhat larger creatures. And that's one thing that has made this place special. Fossils showing the tracks of those first animals. But there's something else, and it has to do with our understanding of an extinction event. Well, at the end of the Devonian period, there were two major extinction events. Now, they may have been caused by a meteor, a volcano, perhaps a change in ocean chemistry. Nobody's quite sure. But whatever happened, 70 to 80% of the world's marine invertebrates were completely wiped out. The jawless fishes were gone, and the jawed fishes, well, they were pretty much all gone. But what if they weren't? So getting back to Romer's Gap, this has long been a problem. If the Devonian extinction event wiped everything out, and there being no fossil record, it did seem this was the case. How did tetrapods suddenly appear walking on land in the fossil record after 340 million years ago? It was a mystery. Not even a tooth had been found anywhere in the world during the mysterious Romer's Gap. But then came Blue Beach. Well, Romer's Gap is a little bit like the Bermuda Triangle of paleontology. But then researchers like Jason Anderson of the University of Calgary studied a collection of fossils that seemed to fall right within that time period. And those fossils were from right here at Blue Beach. Now, they had been collected in the 1950s, but they had only begun to be understood in recent decades. And those, combined with some other fossil discoveries in Scotland, started to close the mystery of the missing ears. Early research had hypothesized that low atmospheric oxygen may have prevented organisms from thriving and evolving during this period. But the findings at Blue Beach have shown that's simply not the case. And any debate over the age of the fossils was put to rest by dating fossilized pollen found in the rock next to the tetrapods. Fossilized pollen is a well-accepted method for confirming dates of rock layers, since the pollen record is correlated to dates and locations worldwide. So researchers from all over the world have been coming here to answer the mysteries of Romer's Gap. And they now know that instead of creatures jumping from one period of evolution to another, they actually transition smoothly from creatures in the sea to creatures on land. And for paleontologists, that's huge. Blue Beach came to prominence in the 1800s with visits from world-famous geologists such as Sir Charles Lyell, Sir W.E. Logan, and Sir John William Dawson. And now it's attracting a new generation of geologists and paleontologists who are realizing something new about the 1841 Logan discovery. Some paleontologists say Blue Beach will mean the end of the Romer's Gap. That it will in fact turn out to be just the result of scientists not looking in the right places to find evidence to fill the gap. They weren't looking on a small beach next to the mudflats of the Minas Basin. You know, I suspect that in the years to come, there will be much more to the paleontological story of Blue Beach. Well, not very far from here, still along the Avon River, there is a spot which is also full of history, although history that feels a lot more recent than 350 million years ago. The Avonport dike system. It's where I'll be after the break. You know, they say there's gold buried on Oak Island, but maybe, just maybe, people have been searching the wrong Oak Island. There are 2 Oak Islands in Nova Scotia, and the second one is surrounded almost completely by the Avonport dike system that was built by the Acadians in the 1700s. And for those of you who know Acadian history, it is rumored in all sorts of places around this province that they buried gold at the time of the expulsion in 1755. The Avonport dike system, just a few kilometers away from Blue Beach, is where I'm on my walkabout. Yes, this area of land is called Oak Island. It's not an island anymore, but before the arrival of the Acadians, it was a tidal island against a bend in the river. Acadians established a community here only just across the river from Grand Pre, and repeated what they did there, building dikes, turning the tidal marshland into productive farmland. Farmland that is still being used actively to this very day. They named it Oak Island because at the time the land was not submerged by marsh and was full of oak trees. Over time, there was a mill here, as well as a chapel and burying ground, and it grew into a distinct community from the nearby and larger Grand Pre. When I mentioned Oak Island and gold, it was a bit of a joke, of course, but there is some truth to it. The French had developed a copper mine over in Cape Dore across the Minas Basin, and the abundant fishing grounds in the basin, combined with the farmland that the Acadians had created from the salt marshes, would have felt like riches to people settling here from France. After the expulsion of the Acadians in 1755, they were replaced by the New England planters, Yorkshire farmers, and United Empire Loyalists. Each built their own farms on the land reclaimed by the Acadians, eventually transitioning that land to pasture and hay production and away from other crops. So in the 1920s, hay production dropped off dramatically. The internal combustion engine was replacing horses on farms, so of course you didn't need the hay. Then came the Second World War, and the labor pool basically vanished. And as a result, farmers stopped spending time and money maintaining these dikes. By 1948, many of them were reverting to salt marsh. It was recognized in 1949 that the farmland would need to be protected, and so the Marshlands Rehabilitation Act was introduced by the Canadian government to prevent losing any more agricultural property. Between then and 1970, the act resulted in 30,000 hectares of dike land being protected from reverting back to salt marsh. Well, it's high tide now in the Minas Basin in front of me. The Avon River over here and the Gaspereau River ahead are all full of water. They look dramatically different here at low tide, and that's in part because of just the height of the Bay of Fundy tides. It's all mud at low tide, and those mudflats are basically intertidal areas that are created by sediment deposited by rivers and tides. They're important habitat for invertebrates, and also somewhere you don't want to get your boat stuck. You know, we think of these dike lands as important for agricultural production, and of course they are. This trail I'm walking basically circumnavigates a number of cornfields, but they're also important for other animals such as coyotes, foxes, and rabbits, all kinds of different rodents like meadow voles and shrews. And these dike lands in particular are one of only 2 places in Nova Scotia where the short-eared owl nests. Just about 1.5 kilometers offshore from this trail is Boot Island, which is also an incredibly important bird habitat. The island, as well as the high tide waters to the southwest, are a national wildlife area and a critical staging and migration area for waterfowl and shorebirds. It was protected in 1979 because it was at risk of development from summer homes and cottages. The island is home to birds such as the herring gull, great blue heron, and double-crested cormorant. There are 91 hectares of salt marsh making up the island, 2 hectares of forest, and about 14 hectares of shrub and grassland. So Boot Island, which is just out there, is now a Ramsar wetland of international importance. Ramsar sites are places of significant value to humanity and to the countries in which they reside. There are only 2,400 of them worldwide, and they're established through an international convention. Boot Island itself was created by the erosion of salt marshes through tidal intrusion. At one time, it was much larger. The north side of the island is losing 1 meter of shoreline every single year. And that experience offers a glimpse of what would likely have happened with the salt marshes here on Oak Island had the Acadians not built the dikes and the federal government not taken action to protect them 250 years later. Well, I'm standing at the mouth of the Gaspereau River, which flows out of the Gaspereau Valley, an important wine region in Nova Scotia. Now, just over those trees is a spot called Horton Landing, and that is the site of a very dark chapter in Nova Scotia history. It is the location of Le Grand Dérangement, or the expulsion of the Acadians in 1755, where Acadians were rounded up, put on ships, and sent away to never return. But many of them did return, and they persevered. This is a place that is absolutely full of history. It's amazing that Oak Island could have so much in such a small area. You have the Acadians, the planters, the Yorkshire settlers, and of course you have those first tetrapods 350 million years ago that climbed out of the ocean. Henry Ford once said that failure is just an opportunity to try again. And that's exactly what the Acadians did. And that's exactly what the paleontologists did when they were trying to close the Romer's Gap. And of course, it's also what those tetrapods did so many millions of years ago. So I hope that's something you get a chance to think about, overcoming failure and perseverance on your next walkabout.
Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine.